Well, let's bring in our guests now. And joining us via Zoom from Maryland is Mr. Aloysius Ordu, Director of the Africa Growth Initiative at the Brookings Institution. Kambale Musevuli is a Congolese human rights activist and analyst with the Center for Research on the Congo-Kinshasa. He's joining us from Accra in Ghana. And Dr. Mustafa Yusuf Ali is a co-founder and chairman of the Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies. He's joining us from Nairobi. Thank you all for being a part of this discussion. Dr. Mustafa, if I may start off with you, DRC has officially become a member of the East African community. What changes immediately for both the DRC and the East African community?
Thank you, Beatrice. First of all, this is a milestone for the East African community, for the DRC to be joining this community. And one of the major impact immediately is the swelling of the East African community's population by now another 105 million people. So this means that the East African community is going to have more than 300 million people. And that in itself is one huge market. The second impact here, which is major, is the resources that DRC comes with to East Africa region in terms of high value minerals, not just any minerals, but high value minerals, rich farmland, water resources, and the potential of expanding the power generation in the East African region. DRC brings all these to the East African community, and it's a major milestone for the region.
Kambale, for a country that has known a lot of conflict, since independence, is this a milestone for the DRC?
Not just for the DRC, for the entire African continent, but it has to be looked at in two folds. First fold is what my colleague earlier just mentioned about the economic impact that it has in the region. But the second fold, which is more the concerns of the Congolese, is how this joining of this community will fundamentally change the condition of the Congolese people. It's a country with a lot of wealth, estimated at $24 trillion, which is the United States and Europe GDP combined. It has no turmoil. It has also known over 6 million deaths due to the conflict in DRC, caused by its neighbors who are members of the Eastern African community, specifically Rwanda and Uganda. So joining it for Congolese, we're looking at it from how is that going to change the lives of the Congolese? And two, if there will be a mechanism where the people of the Congo being in the community could use the courts in the EAC to solve some of the pending issues, such as the International Court of Justice ruling that Uganda owes Congo $300 million and all the potential. So that's the prism in which that is looking. But fundamentally, this is actually great news that Congo is joining the community.
Mr. Ordu, your thoughts?
Thank you very much. I fully concur with my brothers in their observations. I see basically four main impacts as a result of this monumental announcement of the DRC joining the EAC. The first and foremost is trade, all right? Because the whole reason for an integrated union is really to boost trade with members. Currently, DRC runs a trade deficit with all its members. I'll give you an example. On the export side, the EAC exported $940 million worth of export to the DRC in 2019, and they imported only 894. So trade between the members would really boom. Another angle that the trade will come from is that right now, DRC imports a lot of things from Zambia, which is not a member of the EAC. And most of that is foodstuff.
Right.
So I imagine that the Ugandans, the Kenyans, the Rwandese will be positioning to supply DRC with some of those foodstuffs. So trade is going to be very important. The second is infrastructure development. Because for the first time in the history of the region, you now have the Indian Ocean linking the Atlantic Ocean. So the potential for cross-border railways, for cross-border roads and bridges will be very, very important. And then finally, of course, security. Right now, DRC has been fighting the insurgents on the border with Uganda alone. Now it will be a regional approach to insecurity, which will also benefit everybody in the East African region.
Dr. Mustafa, interesting situation being brought out here, the question of security. And Kambale pointed out that, several members in the East African region have been causing disagreements to the DRC. How do you see this playing out, though?
Beatrice, DRC, unfortunately, even though we expect major impacts and consequences in the East African community, DRC comes with the tag of the problem child, and that tag that DRC comes with might challenge the other countries for some time before it is fully addressed. There's still huge conflict across large swaths of the territory of the DRC. 100 different militia groups in the eastern parts of DRC alone, and then the entry of the Islamic State, calling themselves the province of Islamic State of Central Africa, then the ADF, the Allied Democratic Forces, all these, and the challenges that Cabo Delgado in Mozambique is facing. DRC is a conduit for most of the fighters, the extremists and the terrorists. So all these will come really to the doorstep of the other East African communities. However, Beatrice, I want to say this, that the other countries of East African community are not accustomed, or rather, it's not that they are not accustomed to these challenges. South Sudan is a deplorable basket case. Kenya has faced terrorism and has been dealing with these issues. And so in terms of security, yes, there will be challenges, but these challenges have been there, and it's now up to the leadership in the East African community to deal with this security.
Right. Kambale, do you feel optimistic, though, that the EAC now has the capacity to stabilize the DRC?
I believe it has the capacity. It's a political will. The situation in Congo is not a new situation. It's been going on for 2 decades. We've had success where African nations are engaged. Let's look at 2012. We had a rebellion, M23 rebels, supported by Rwanda. They invaded the DRC. We had a positive impact of a EAC member. The Tanzanian forces were deployed in the DRC. Their special forces came, fought on the ground, and stopped the movement of those rebels. So this was an African solution to African problems. So we know that that's a possibility. But beyond even what the government are going to do, because that's my fear in our discussion, because we're talking a lot about trade. How will this trade that we are discussing impact the ordinary citizen in Kenya? No, are we just talking about the big businesses trading in the region, being able to get some fish from the different lakes or some product? Or we're talking about the ordinary citizen who will be impacted? We have to learn from West Africa, the ECOWAS. What have been some of the challenges that they faced, where people in ECOWAS have complained many times beyond just traveling without the visa in the region. Normal vendors or merchants are not able to trade just as similar as the big companies. So we have to look at the lessons learned in other regions and make sure that this is not just a macro change, that the ordinary citizens of these regions are able to see that too.
Mr. Ordu, your thoughts there, though, because the EAC today has 193 million citizens. DRC's admission would raise that to 275 million in the region. How will trade, though, how will, the acceptance of the DRC impact regional trade?
Sure. Thank you very much for that question. I think DRC brings a lot to the region, and the region also brings a lot to the DRC. That's why I would like to reframe the whole notion that almost 100 million Africans in the DRC are characterized as a chlorine child for EAC. I don't think that characterization should be encouraged. Second, it's a huge market. So from the point of view of private sector development, DRC is a humongous opportunity for the Kenyans, the manufacturing basket of East Africa, for the Rwandese who are already making inroads to do more in terms of outreach in the DRC, and of course, Ugandans who have a lot to trade with. And also, just to give you an example, in 2019, Kenya exported $132 million worth of export to the DRC. Rwanda exported 372 million, and Uganda exported over $270 million to the CI. So I don't see the DRC as a problem child at all. On the contrary, the one thing to emphasize, though, as Kambale and Mustafa will confirm, DRC is one of the poorest countries in the world, and yet it is one of the richest on the planet in terms of mineral resources, etc. So the idea now of being part of the integrated East Africa would hopefully help. And that requires four things. One, the EAC members, including the DRC, need to build robust institutions. They need to ensure good governance. Good governance has eluded DRC for years. Infrastructure, infrastructure, infrastructure. They need to focus on building infrastructure, as I mentioned earlier.
Kambale, of course, the ordinary people are expecting some change. I mean, in Kinshasa, in DRC itself, what changes do you foresee this adding to the ordinary people?
First, we also have to put that in a framework. The ordinary people in DRC today are not discussing the joining of DRC into the EAC. That's the reality on the ground. It's mainly in the political circles and the political elite in the country. What is in front of the Congolese people is how are they going to have a better life when they're only making $1 a day? How are they going to be able to pay for the tuition, the school fees for the children? How are they going to be able to feel safe in the country? Because we're talking about a country joining with 100 million people, but we did not really break down the potential of the Congo. Now, with Congo joining the EAC, as I mentioned before, this is actually a good thing from a continental perspective that the African countries have to come. But we must think that the people joining are human beings. Half of the Congolese population is under the age of 18. We're talking of 50 million Congolese, right? Young people who are a driving force for labor in the heart of Africa and can completely transform. So if we address the basic needs, I would be interested in seeing Kenyans coming and say, we are going to come and build hospitals.
Right.
We are going to provide some economic, create economic activity to hire Congolese, because the betterment of their lives and the security and the stability, that will completely transform the entire African East African community and the entire African continent.
All right, Kambale Musevuli, Aloysius Ordu, and Dr. Mustafa Ali. We're going to take a short break now and continue with this discussion in a moment. To stay with us. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Aloysius Ordu, Kambale Musevuli, and Mustafa Yusuf are still standing by on Zoom to unpack the significance of the DRC's new membership to the East African Community Bloc. Mr. Ordu, if I may start off with you, the East African Community as a regional economic community is one of the most successful on the continent. What is the status first of East African trade? And, what percentages are we likely to be talking about with the admission of the DRC and, some of the barriers that exist to trade?
Basically, let me first of all endorse everything my brother Kambale said earlier, because I think we often ignore history in those, when we say Congo, DRC Congo the current situation it finds itself. The current situation it finds itself obviously has a lot to do with history, as he pointed out, the way the country had been ravaged. And even when the country elected its own prime minister in Patrice Lumumba, the guy was eliminated, right? And then replaced by a stooge, which we know, and then this is where we are today. So, but on your question, I think, as I mentioned, the trade East African community was by far the most successful integration scheme on the African continent, by far. And in terms of growth, if you just imagine what happened before COVID, as you know, during the period 2015 to 2019, the East African community consistently grew at 6% and above. All the countries in that region, except of course, war-ravaged South Sudan. So this is what is being embraced, right? The growth potential of that region is going to be even greater in terms of opportunities by bringing in a population of 100 million people in the Congo DRC. As we mentioned earlier, the trade between these two countries, the new member and the rest of the community is really where the greatest gains will come from. I talked about infrastructure earlier, with particularly railway, the potential for railway, the potential for roads. Don't forget air as well, the potential for air, and unleashing all these infrastructural developments would be really beneficial to all the member states of the enlarged community, including the Congo, the DRC. But here are three things the EAC must do in order to really reap the benefits of these infrastructural development. First, ideas. Ideas matter. Having concrete ideas in terms of the infrastructure development, and then converting these projects to bankability is the best way to attract financing along the lines that Kambele mentioned earlier. And trust, very, very important. You cannot buy trust. So trust, credible institutions would be very, very important. And that trust is what will enable the EAC members to address some of the insecurity issues that we talked about earlier. So these are some of the things that I believe that the current leaders, by continuing to meet together, by continuing to integrate, by fostering closer alliances, private sector development, infrastructure development, agricultural development, etc., that's what will enable this whole region to boom. It's a region waiting to boom, basically, which will be to the benefit of the Congo DRC people and everybody in the community.
How do you see, though, Dr. Mustafa, how do you see the dynamics of the regional countries? For instance, how is Kinshasa going to relate with Kampala and Kigali, going by, the previous accusations that have abounded among the three?
I think the leaders in these countries now do not have any excuse to continue with their personal differences. Power tends to be personalized on the African continent, and our leaders tend to take very personal issues, and again, depends with the personalities. I see some rapprochement between some of these leaders, and that's a good thing, but we need them to be brought together. By the way, I think the Kenyan president, Uhuru Kenyatta, has been at the forefront of trying to bring these leaders together in order to address the challenges that they themselves have been facing. And when they address these challenges, personality issues and challenges between these countries, I think and I believe that this region will move forward properly.
Right, gentlemen, I want to get your winding down comments. And Kambale, I'll start off with you, because looking at the opportunities and the challenges of the DRC joining the EAC and your discussion here, are you optimistic it brings value to the Union?
Not just the Union. I will continue to insist that the regional integration is important for the African continent, for us to be able to grow as a continent and have an impact in the lives of African people. The challenge is tremendous. It can be solved. Always quote my math professor who told me that you could have a square root of a negative number. And I told the teacher that it's a lie. But I said, well, we created an answer. It's square root of negative x's. I square root of x, right? So they found an impossible solution for an impossible problem. So it's the same with the DRC. But we also have to be a little bit sober, because it's really important to understand how the Congolese people are really feeling about the situation with EAC. We want it to succeed. We want the people of the region to also enjoy the resources of the Congo is for the African people. But we have a very fundamental problem that because of these resources, people are dying. I'll use a concrete example. In the town of Kisangani that we mentioned before, this is a town that received 4,000 bombs that was dropped in that city. Why was 4,000 bombs dropped in the city? The armies of Rwanda and Uganda fought each other on DRC soil over a diamond mine. There was UN condemnation about this situation, right? And this is one of the cases that we took to the International Court of Justice, and Uganda has been found liable, not guilty, and then they have to pay $300 million worth for reparation for those crimes. Why wasn't the Rwanda found guilty? Because Rwanda has never signed the Rome Treaty, so the court is outside of its jurisdiction, just as the United States has never signed the Rome Treaty, so you cannot sue the US at the International Court of Justice as well. So joining the EAC for Congolese, especially Congolese human rights activists, we are looking into what are the mechanisms of justice that can be implemented so that the victims of war, so if we have 6 million people who are dying, we have at least 6 million family members who are seeking that, as they feel that it's not just people are coming to take resources, that they're actually thinking that we are brothers and sisters, and using mechanism of the region that will help in prospering the community. Anything less than that, that's only focused on economic prosperity and not taking the question of justice at the same level, we risk not making the impact that we want to see in the lives of the Congolese or the lives of the people in the region.
Mr. Ordu, your thoughts?
Very quickly, absolutely agree with Kambele 100%. And just to recap, trust. We cannot address the issues we're talking about here, especially of the insecurity type with the resource extraction that Congo DRC offers the world. Those things would only manifest if we build tremendous trust in the leadership. Second, engaged leadership. It's one thing to be a leader, but to be engaged in a regional approach, in a continental approach under the auspices of the African Continental Free Trade Area to really focus the torchlight, attention to what's happening in this region, Congo DRC. That's the way out. Credible institutions. Joining the EAC will enable more institution building within the region. And then if you think of the World Bank's ease of doing business, for example, in terms of reforms, one of the things you find is that countries in EAC have done very, very well in terms of overall economic, social, and other reforms. Rwanda tops the list there. Kenya, Uganda and Tanzania are not far behind. Right now, some of the reforms that the DRC is doing is consistent with a greater reform of institutions, because you need credible institutions, you need trust, you need engaged leadership. With this together, the trade will boom and the infrastructure development, which we talked about earlier, will be unleashed for the greater good of our people in this particular part of
Dr. Mustafa, you have the final word.
Despite the massive challenges that are there in the DR Congo, Beatrice, equally lies massive benefits if this is going to be handled well. And I believe that this is going to impact, is going to help, is going to work for the young people, mainly to their benefit. There will be need to resolve the conflicts, outstanding conflicts that have been running for decades, as colleagues mentioned. And it is the African countries, Africa Union, East African community that should take leadership in dealing and resolving these conflicts. no one from outside will come and address and deal and resolve these conflicts for us. And lastly, institutions, good governance is something that is needed, required by all the countries of the East African community in order to move forward with confidence and help the future generations benefit from these kind of integration efforts.
All right, gentlemen, we'll leave it there for today, and that's all we have time for this week on the program. Thank you to our guests for their insightful commentary on this subject. Mr. Aloysius Ordu in Maryland, Director of the Africa Growth Initiative at the Brookings Institution. Kambale Musevuli in Accra, Congolese human rights activist and analyst with the Center for Research on the Congo-Kinshasa, and Dr. Mustafa Yusuf Ali in Nairobi, co-founder and chairman of the Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies.